Forward School is brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
The primary reason for considering zone banding really are, number one, to think in terms of where are the roots growing and how can we position nutrients so that the essential nutrients are available when the corn plant needs them most. So we're trying to meet the plant requirements. And number two, we're also trying to apply those nutrients in an efficient manner as possible, because we want as high a fraction as possible of the nutrients applied to get into the crop that year if possible. And thirdly, we're really trying to apply the nutrients in a position where there is minimal loss to the environment.
Yeah, and that's a big issue here in Ontario now as we confront phosphorus and the impact on the lakes. Let's talk about, what situations farmers should consider, deep banding.
Deep banding should be considered primarily as a fall application for phosphorus and potassium applied before corn, perhaps before soybeans as well, but it's certainly before corn. And they should be considered especially as a deep banded approach wherever there is an environmental concern about losses of dissolved phosphorus from broadcast applied fertilizers to water sources.
What about different fields, Tony? You mentioned earlier thinking about low soil test K, P and K
right.
fields. When I look over a field, are there some things that say, hey, I should consider that approach?
The deep banded approach will be most beneficial in situations where there is significant stratification, where the relatively non-mobile nutrients like phosphorus and potassium are concentrated at very high levels close to the surface and where they decline rapidly with depth. And so I make some recommendations there that when you have very low concentrations below the 4-inch, 10-centimeter depth, those are the kind of situations in which deep banding of essential nutrients would be very helpful, especially when those deeper levels are also, frankly, too low to maintain adequate uptake.
Yeah. You also talked about slopes, and obviously, and maybe stay away from streams.
Yes, so it's most essential to do any type of banding, any type of immediate contact with soil in situations where you've got steep slopes or where you're close to ditches or water bodies. There's no question about the fact that the fields that have the greatest risk of water runoff in an intense rainstorm are the fields that I would target first for a banded approach.
What about starter fertilizer? Where do they factor in?
Starter fertilizers are often still a benefit even with a deep banding approach. So the need for starter fertilizers is not necessarily eliminated with a deep banding approach, in part because the starter fertilizer usually places a smaller amount of the same nutrient, like phosphorus or like nitrogen, very close to the seed. But usually there is less of a need for starter fertilizer when there is a deep banded applied nutrient, because the bulk of the crop requirements has been met with that deep banded application.
I guess two questions. What about location? Where are we putting that thing?
Yeah, this is part of ongoing research in terms of where should we essentially put that nutrient. Should the nutrient be relatively shallowly incorporated into the top 2 or 3 inches, or should it be placed deeper? And by deeper, I mean anything beyond about 6 inches of depth. And what I've learned over time is that there is a benefit sometimes with a very deep application as compared to a relatively shallow application. The benefit of a deep application tends to be more common whenever there is a soil moisture factor during the middle of the season that is restricting access of a shallow applied nutrient, because there simply is not enough water and new root proliferation near the surface where the highest concentrations are. So we have to consider the climate, we have to consider the degree of stratification that's occurred over time because of different tillage systems and histories of broadcast application.
You said, obviously, from a timing perspective, fall for P and K from banding, and spring for N. Is that?
Definitely. We want spring to be the only time when nitrogen is banded ahead of planting. In terms of depth of nitrogen application, we are dealing with a potentially risky situation because of the opportunity for toxicity of the ammonium with the corn seed and the early seedling roots. And so we recommend a displacement, if possible, of the seed from the zone of the nitrogen by at least 4 to 5 inches, if at all possible. So we need a margin of safety. That margin of safety increases as the rate of nitrogen increases, and as we go to sandier textured soils, and as we go to drier soil conditions, and as we go to less time between the application of the nitrogen and planting date.
Yeah. Hey, final question for you, and that is one of the questions you were asked in the hall today by one of the CCAs, and that is, deep banding, strip till, the additional equipment required. Is it a good fit for smaller farmers? 500, 700 acres. Is it affordable? You had some thoughts on that.
Yeah, so one of my thoughts on that is that it could be affordable even for relatively small farmers, 500 to 800 acres, let's say, if they were prepared to make strip tillage their only system for their row crops. It is not affordable if strip tillage is adopted from the standpoint of being yet another tillage option for that farm. Secondly, I'll make the comment that if the objective is to reduce the risk of dissolved phosphorus loss from broadcast phosphorus application, even small farmers would still have the opportunity to have an immediate incorporation occur in order to ensure contact of that phosphorus fertilizer directly with soil particles, rather than having them just laying on the surface and being susceptible to a high rainfall activity. And then the third comment I made was that essentially there is an opportunity for even small farmers to rely on custom applicators to deband and in the process create those berm tilled zones that are essentially going to be planter ready in spring. So if there is an opportunity for a custom operator who is able to apply those nutrients and do this tillage operation at the same time in a timely manner, that would enable direct planting in the spring, then it's something that even the small farmer can do the economics on and consider it as one of their options.
Well, Tony, hey, thanks for taking the time. Always great to see you north of the border, and we'll have you back on Real Agriculture before too long, I'm sure.
It's always a pleasure.